Are you just getting started with watercolor? Through this series of beginner watercolor exercises, I want to help you build confidence. In this video, we will learn all about washes, the flat, graded, and variegated. Hi there, I'm Audrey, your watercolor bestie, and welcome to my studio. If you like this video and want to start your watercolor journey, I have a free course, Watercolor Basics for the Absolute Beginner, and you can sign up using the link in the description below. Let me first define the terms we're going to cover today and then dive deeper. A flat wash is a solid swatch of color. A graded wash is a faded swatch of color. And a variegated wash shows two colors on opposite ends and the mixture in the middle. Let's discuss supplies. For paints, I'll be using the Lucas brand that you can find at Jerry's Artorama. And I really like Lucas because they're artist grade quality for student grade prices. As you'll see in my demonstration, the paints are very creamy and rich in color. I'm going to use the round size 6 brush for all of my demonstrations, and this is the Creative Mark brand, also found at Jerry's Artorama. For paper, I'm using the Canson brand, cold pressed, and I just cut them into small squares. Now that we're familiar with both the wet on dry and wet on wet methods, we're going to practice these washes on both dry and wet paper. So if you haven't watched the other parts, make sure to check those out and then come back. When painting a flat wash, you want to achieve a solid swatch of color. It has uniform color and tone and no visible brush strokes. I've done a couple of examples here, as you can see. This was the flat wash on dry. This was the flat wash on wet. These were both done on dry and this was done on wet. So let's do that together. When I do a flat wash, I usually do it on small areas of my painting, unless I have a larger brush, because it's difficult to spread out the paint evenly very quickly. Another tip before we start is to make sure you have enough paint to do the whole thing. And that's why we're working with small pieces of paper, because if we were working on a large one, we would have to have a lot of paint ready to go. Because we want to achieve a solid color, that also means the same value. And so once you pick up paint directly from the palette, or if you wash out your brush, you're changing the ratio of paint to water. So to maintain that evenness, you want to make sure that you have enough paint mixed up and ready to go. The last tip is, as you do these washes, it's kind of helpful to tilt the paper a little bit, because as you go, the wet paint or wet water area is going to start beading at the bottom, and then that'll help kind of, push the paint in a downward motion. So let me go ahead and mix up some blue, and I'm using like a medium to dark value. And I'm starting with my paper already tilted. I'm just going to use smooth strokes back and forth. And I'm just encouraging the paint to move downward. All right. Now, if you do see brush strokes or unevenness in your wash, it might just be that, the first couple strokes started drying, and then by the time, you kept moving down, you're basically now layering, and so you get different values. And it's also okay if it didn't turn out perfect the first time. Remember, you're trying new things, and so, try it and then try again, try again, try again until you really get the hang of it. Let's set that aside for now, and then do the flat wash on wet paper. Remember our tips from the last video about wet on wet, right? You want to achieve maybe like level 3 of wet paper. It doesn't need to be super glossy, but just semi-glossy, but more wet than just damp to the touch, right? So again, the wet on wet is also, really hard to get right, but take your time. And you can also tilt your paper, towards the light to make sure that it's the right level of wetness. Okay, I'm gonna grab some more of that paint. try to get that same value that I had before, although it's going to turn out lighter, and you'll see why. But here we go. Again, just sweeping motions back and forth to try to achieve that same flat look. Okay. Okay, let's compare the two really quickly. So you can see that even though I started out with the same value of blue, because on the wet paper, the paint is being spread out more and being diluted by the wet paper. So that's why you see a much lighter value. Now, I don't know if you could tell while I was painting this or maybe while you were practicing this, I feel like it's easier to do the flat wash on wet paper because, like I said, if you do it on dry paper, it kind of dries very quickly. So it's really difficult to go back in there and then try to, like make it right, because as we discovered in the second part, in part 2 of this series, right, you could accidentally get bleeds or blooms, and then it creates these unwanted effects. So if you're going to do a flat wash, even if it's on a small area, try to use wet paper first. You'll get a very even application of color. And then if you needed to make this area darker, you can wait for this to dry and then go over it and then layer, right? That's why we learned about layering. Let's set that aside and move on to the graded wash. Now, similar to the flat wash on dry paper, you want to use a graded wash on a smaller area of dry paper. I use this technique a lot on my paintings, like in this Monstera, and I like to start with a saturated area of color and then kind of fade it out. To do a graded wash, I'm going to start with a paint to water ratio of like 90-10, because I want to start with a very saturated color. I'm going to tilt my paper again because I really want to encourage the paint to move down. So here we go with that saturated color. I'm going to dip it in my water and then blot just a little bit and then come back and then rub up against that last stroke. And then you'll start to see that it's a lighter color or lighter value. And just keep going smoothly, stroke by stroke. And again, encouraging the paint that's beading at the bottom there to keep moving down. And so keep going until you either run out of pigment or you run out of space. But what you really want to see is just this nice gradient from dark to light. Let's try this on wet paper. So again, I'm wetting my paper first. And again, you don't want it too wet. Just about level 3 of wetness. And I'm going to pick up that saturated color of paint. And I'm going to go about it the same way that I did with the dry. You can already start to see the paint kind of, already moving its way down. Because the paper is already wet, the pigments are wanting to travel, they're wanting to move. And so I almost don't have to tilt the paper, but it still helps. I'm going to clean up that bottom right there. I love using this technique whenever I want to have really soft edges or a soft transition from dark to light, like in this cardinal. And again, when we compare the graded wash on dry versus wet paper, you can again see that difference in value even though we started out with that same dark blue. The transitions through each value also look smoother on wet paper. On the dry, maybe I could have done it a little bit better, but you can still see you can still see the striations. To level up your graded wash, you can do a variegated wash. And again, we'll do this on both dry and wet paper. Now with a variegated wash, you want to choose 2 colors that'll create a nice mixed color. You can reference your mixing chart or do a few practice tests. For now, I'm just gonna stick with my ultramarine blue and yellow. And I'm gonna start with my blue. I'm gonna tilt the paper again. I'm gonna start with my blue, kind of, bring it down, fade it out just a little bit. And just letting it travel on its own. Then I'm gonna pick up my yellow. Just letting that mix together a little bit more here. Now you can also see that since I try to, work it a little bit more, I am gonna start to see some unnecessary blooms, but that happens and that's okay. So let's try this again on wet paper. Now the variegated wash doesn't always have to go from dark to light to dark values. It's just a matter of using 2 or more colors. This is especially true when you're painting a sunset or a sunrise. You may have, 3 or more colors mixed in there, but you really want that smooth transition from one color to the next, and that's why painting with the wet water will probably work better. Because as you can see on my variegated wash on dry paper, right, you can probably start to see those hard edges that were starting to form because the blue started drying. But when I introduced the yellow, I was like, oh, wait a second, I'm not seeing the mixed color. So then I went back into the blue and tried to rework it. And so because I did that, I'm starting to see those scallops. So that happens, and for this kind of demonstration, it's okay, but that's why you really need to practice these techniques so that you know what happens, and then if it does happen, how can you fix it? So now that this is dry, if I wanted to fix it, I can go in there with a really small damp brush and just very lightly, very gently, work out those hard edges. But for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm just gonna leave it as is. It's okay. So great job. Washes really help with learning how to control your water and brush. So if you're still struggling with that, pause here and do these washes over and over again. You can practice a flat wash with each of your paint colors and then do a graded wash of each color. And then choose 2 colors at a time and try mixing them together. Even though it seems like you're not really painting anything worthwhile, it's actually only going to help you because you're building muscle memory. You're learning about your paint colors and supplies, and you're learning to just let loose and have fun with no pressure to create anything specific. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something new. There are more parts to this series, so please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and leave a comment down below with your favorite wash, and tell me about your experience too. Happy painting.